Today, we're going to be talking about part 2 on how podcasts make money. Part 1 was about YouTube ad revenue. There'll be a link to that in the description. And part 2 is about ad reads. Welcome to another episode of Catching You Up with
Nadav. It's
I would like to thank the executive producer of this episode, Stoned Ape Canico. Without their big baller support, I'd probably be hanging around vending machines with a quarter with a hole through it and a string tied around it. And right before someone's about to purchase a Coca-Cola, I'll be there being like, hey, right now the soda's like $1.25 with this thing. How about you just pay me $1 and then I'll get this soda for you? And then, over a certain amount of time, let's call it maybe a year or so, I'll be making 6 figures. But I'd get so sweaty and sun damaged that, you know what? I'm actually pretty stoked that Stoned Ape Canico is showing their big baller support so that I don't have to do that. If you would like to become a big baller supporter of the show, go ahead and click the Patreon link in the description below. Now would be a good time to remind you, comment, like, subscribe right now. So if you recall part 1 of this series, I talked about YouTube ad revenue and how if a podcaster was smart, they would be figuring out multiple ways to monetize their podcast. That way, if one level of monetization somehow breaks, they'll be protected in other ways. For example, if you have a YouTube adpocalypse, budget spending starts going way down. Now, I'm going to be talking about the evolution that ad reads have had on the comedy podcast scene specifically, but this more or less applies to most other verticals in the podcast realm, somewhere where their persona exists outside of the podcast as well. So one thing to keep in mind is before I got into the podcast game about 7 or 8 years ago, there were multiple ways that podcasters could extract value out of their show. Sure, they could get YouTube ad revenue or some ad reads on their show, but podcasts that were hosted by comedians saw value in terms of just boosting ticket sales. That's always the goal for every comedian. How do I get more people to buy tickets to my live shows? And yes, having a podcast will increase your ticket sales. Why? People are going to organically find your podcast. And some of those people maybe aren't even particularly stand-up comedy fans, but they are a fan of podcasts.
Yeah. I want you to come see me do stand-up. That's it. That's how I pay my rent. All this free content, that's it.
It's all for stand-up.
It's all for stand-up.
Yeah, I agree. The whole, my agent had this thing where the first time I experienced it, I was like, what the fuck? Which was, we were after my taping, after the late show, we're done. We're out at a bar having a drink, but big group. This guy comes up with the shirt on, with my shirt. He was like, man, I was at the show. I had a great time. I don't really watch stand-up. I don't watch specials or anything. He's like, I'm just like a big podcast fan. I just came just to see you because I love the podcast. I was like, all right, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. We took a picture and he walked away. My agent was like, isn't that crazy that he was like, I know that you're a stand-up, but I like that you do this.
Yeah.
And I'll come see you because of the other thing, but I'm not like a stand-up guy.
So for a lot of podcasts, ad reads were something that probably started close to 8 or 9 years ago. And really, they were just plugged into a system that was around before podcasts, radio. That's why if you still listen to radio, you'll notice that a lot of radio shows sell the same kind of ads that podcasts do. MyBookie and Manscaped and BetterHelp. When I first started working at your mom's house, the ad reads were always only for the audio version of the podcast only. And I lifted them out of the video version because that system wasn't set up yet. The people that are reps were, selling inventory to were unfamiliar with the YouTube landscape. So before we get too far ahead, let me explain how the pipeline works to you. There's sponsors over here, and then there's podcasts over here. There's actually 2 middlemen in between the sponsors and the actual podcast that they buy spots on. So over here, there's the sponsors, and then there's the agencies that represent all the sponsors. And then there's the agency that represent all the podcasts. And then there's the podcasts. So the sponsor and the podcast each have a rep, and then those reps talk to each other, and then that's how the exchange works. If you ask me, that's too many middlemen. But hopefully we'll have some ad read reform at some point in the next couple years. But this is how the system currently works. Of course, there are some companies that have relationships with sponsors directly, so they cut out one of the middlemen, but that has its pros and cons with it too. But these radio ad companies have now evolved to sell ad inventory on shows that live on YouTube. Speaking of ad reads, we're going to take a quick break from the show to tell you about the sponsor of this episode, Factor. Want to eat amazing food but don't want to spend forever preparing it? Try Factor. It takes just 2 minutes. They send chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals straight to your door. All you have to do is heat them up. They have dozens of meal options to choose from and more than 60 add-on items to shake things up. I had the cilantro chicken meal in my last batch, which was incredible. I personally picked the chef's choice. I think on the next one, I'm going to be picking the nutrition-friendly recommendations. But they also have these cold-pressed juices that are absolutely incredible. They taste fresh. And, whenever my back was acting up, I was really glad that I had the turmeric cold-pressed juice, because it's a natural anti-inflammatory. Pause or reschedule your deliveries at any time. Factor works with you and for you. Head to factormeals.com/Nadav50. Use promo code Nadav50 to get 50% off. That's code Nadav50 at factormeals.com/Nadav50 to get 50% off. Now let's get back to the show. So why is it set up like this? Why is there such a long pipeline between sponsors and podcasts? Well, I have a theory that it has to do with bandwidth. I think the companies that represent the sponsors just have an entire sales team that's just devoted to creating and building relationships with their sponsors. So because they're doing all that, they don't have time to find and foster podcasts that match up with their sponsors. They rather outsource that to some professionals. Hey, we have this show that has these demographics, it gets this many views. Do you have anyone that would be interested in buying ad inventory on there? And now these reps and these reps now talk to each other. And then they relay messages back to their clients. And a little more under the hood on how the finances of this work. So for YouTube ad sales, the threshold that you need to hit in order to start collecting ad revenue from YouTube is, I think you need something like, 1,000 subscribers or like 10,000 hours watched or 1,000 hours. Then they'll be like, all right, you have enough of an audience. We'll let you start monetizing your show. In order to cross the threshold to make ad reads make sense on your show for ad reps is about 50,000 downloads per week per episode. And then as you start crossing milestones, like let's say you go from 50,000 to 100,000 weekly downloads or streams, your ad rate goes up. And then it just keeps on happening where your new baseline is now 200,000 instead of 100,000. Your rates will now fluctuate, and you want that baseline to just keep on going up. But things happen. The algorithms will get out of favor with some channels or vice versa. They'll get super in favor with some channels. So as views start coming in, you need to really prioritize monetizing your project and your content so that you can make it better, so that you can start hiring people to take care of, some of the more menial tasks that you've always been doing yourself. I know that once YMH started hiring me, they were like, great, fucking, you take care of, post-production on the episode. You'll take care of the audio mix. You'll take care of the video editing. But then also it was, hey, we're already paying you this. Let's have you start handling prepping everything. So start producing, start handling audio drops, video drops, playback, go through the emails, anything that's notable, forward to us, and then eventually start giving them more and more responsibilities as, you're able to pay this person more and more. Hey, take care of booking for us. Hey, take care of hiring another person for us. And you're probably asking yourself, well, how much do ad reads go for? Well, they range from hundreds of dollars per ad read to thousands of dollars per ad read to tens of thousands of dollars per ad read.
When we first started Two Bears, and we started getting ad sales on Two Bears during the pandemic, the Travel Channel came to us. I used to be a Travel Channel, and they were like, yo, we'd like to hire you and Tom to do a TV show for us. And I was like, that's why you do the podcast.
100% right. That was
That's
the model.
why you do the fucking podcast. And I went to Tom, and he was like, cool, let's do it. So they came back with their offer, and Tom said to me, we make that. What they want to offer both of us, we make that. And I went, what? And he goes, for like a read. And by the way, they weren't offering a ton of fucking money at the time. It was during the pandemic. Dude. And I went, huh? And he goes, for 1 minute of me and you reading an ad.
We get that.
But
so they're going to give notes and be in control, and they're going to decide if we do more.
And as more and more companies started repping more and more podcasts, there was just more inventory to sell. And if you can fit like 10 ads into one podcast, you could be generating 6 figures a month if you really wanted to. Let's take Joe Rogan Experience, for example. I remember for the longest time, his average duration was like 3 hours per episode. And if he did an ad break every 30 minutes and put like between 2 and 4 sponsors in each of those breaks, Joe could easily be making 6 figures per episode. Easily. That money is wildly lucrative. And it gets so lucrative that there's now companies that are created to cash in on this lucridity? What's the word for that? Lucrativeness? That can't be it. That doesn't sound right. Anyways, it has high lucrativity. These ad reads created such high lucrativity. God, that can't be it. That new companies were created to cash in on this. That's how you get stuff like Kast Media, where, they'll offer big signing bonuses to certain content creators and then say, hey, you now have a monthly guarantee of this amount. And everything's all hunky-dory for a while until they try and court a new podcast where it's like, hey, here's a signing bonus. Here's a new monthly guarantee. And then that shit just kind of dwindles. Some of these companies are just straight up set up like Ponzi schemes. And it's a little ridiculous that they're as flimsy as they are. But for example, Kast Media, which a lot of you have heard Theo Von talking shit about on this past weekend a while ago.
Our podcast was defrauded. We were stolen from. We were taken advantage of. A lot of ways to say it. The company that did it is Kast Media, and the man that did it is Colin Thompson. And I'm going to put his picture in here.
You saw CoffeeZilla make an extensive documentary on how corrupt that shit was. I'll have a link to that CoffeeZilla interview in the description because I don't think I'll be able to cover that better than CoffeeZilla did. But here's my favorite part from that interview with the guy that Theo Von called out from Kast Media.
And I got into this because I wanted to support shows that were bucking the trend, going against the grain, but unique and important to the broader dialogue.
But where's the 4 million? I mean, yeah, I hear you. Everybody's got a grand vision, but the grand vision, when we get to this point, everyone wants to know where the money is, not what the vision is.
We built an infrastructure at Kast that I wasn't tremendously proud of.
But you're saying you pay out more, but I mean, clearly that's, kind of not true, right?
Wait, but you asked for my story. Do you mind if I just tell the story?
Sure.
Doesn't this guy just feel like a huge scumbag? Doesn't he just feel like that, allegedly? From a content creator's perspective, it's hard to tell who's being competitive, but also is genuinely good at what they do. Because you'll get a Kast Media that's like, yeah, dude, here's a huge signing bonus, and also here's a monthly guarantee. And within a couple months, you're like, hey, these checks are getting smaller and smaller. What the fuck is happening? And there's not much you could do about it. Because another thing that sucks about starting up with a new podcast rep agency is that when you first start with them, it takes them a couple months in order to find you your first ad read. And then even after that, it will be months until you get cash from that ad read. For those of you that are aware of something called net 45s, net 30s, net 90s, essentially it means once you've rendered a service from someone, they have 30, 45, 90 days to have to pay you. So what'll happen is you'll do your ad read, then the advertisers have a net 30 to pay the ad reps. The ad reps have a net 30 to pay the podcast reps, and then the podcast reps have a net 30 to pay the content creators. So you are looking at 90 days, 3 months before you're getting paid for your first ad read. And that fucking sucks, dude. Let's say, for example, you've started a YouTube channel or a podcast or both, and it starts doing well. You have no idea who the fuck you should be talking to. I mean, even just starting my channel, there are so many people that have reached out to me saying, hey, we would love to buy sponsorship on your show. And it's like, why the fuck have I never heard of you? I've been in the industry for a while. How have I never heard of you? There are so many scumbags in this industry that overpromise and underdeliver, and it's absolutely disgusting. Because what'll happen is it's just like whack-a-mole. Hopefully there's someone that's doing consulting out there that could guide people in the right direction. Oh, right, I do that. If you want to send me business inquiries, want consulting, or just send stuff to me about the show or that you like it or that you hate it, you can email me at verynadavshow@gmail.com. So this concludes part 2 of how podcasts make money, ad reads. There's going to be a part 3 to this series where I'll probably be discussing merch and special comedy events and how much money could be made off those. What an informative episode about how you can make money off your content. Boy, that's helpful, isn't it? And if you found it helpful, you should subscribe to this channel, comment on this video, or share it with a friend. Rate it. All of it helps me. I'd also like to thank all the people that you're seeing on screen right now. They're all the producers of this show, of this channel, that are all supporting me on Patreon. If you would like to support me on Patreon, you can go ahead and click the link in the description below. Every bit helps, and without the help of my producers, I wouldn't be able to put the show out as regularly and consistently and as well as I do. Man, we learned a lot today, didn't we? Turns out learning could be fun. Who would have thunk it? But most importantly, I would also like to remind you.
This is a totally unconfirmed news.